And that includes oil, coal's coming, natural gas is closely after that. The first chart on the left is oil, the one on the right is coal, and the one on the bottom left is natural gas. And what you'll notice is that the peak, the pinnacle there, where you've actually used up 50%, is right around now, okay? A colleague of mine, Dr. David Holt, down here, actually corrected me the other day. I was giving a presentation and I said it would be about 40 years, and he said 37 and a half. That's a scientist for you, right? At the current rate of production, the rate of extraction and the rate of demand of what the world uses, we have about 37 years of oil left. Anybody thought of that? Anybody thought of what that means for society? You're not going to have cars in the sense that you have them now, or planes, you know, or pretty much anything made in this room, or these lights. That's all going to change. If it changes abruptly, that's pretty bad for civilization. That's what we have to avoid. So that's one of the 800-pound gorillas. And this is not speculation. It's just the way it is. The one on the bottom right is topsoil. And I'm just going to talk about natural resource depletion or degradation in a second also. So I say, if you don't believe me about peak oil, peak energy, peak everything, listen to the experts. Here's a couple of quotes, and I'll let you read them yourself. There's a couple that hit me the hardest. I look at government experts, and I look for petroleum or energy experts. My view is that easy oil, the era of easy oil, has probably passed its peak. Okay? That's coming from a person who works in the oil industry. It's hard for me to read this. And I just mentioned this to somebody earlier. The former U.S. Energy Secretary, obviously for this country, made a comment after or right at the end of his term, and it was, we're not good at recognizing distant threat, even if the probability is 100%. Society ignoring peak oil is like the people of Pompeii ignoring the rumblings below Vesuvius. The fact that only a couple of people in here know about peak oil, or probably could have told me what it is, scares me. Because it's going to affect your generation. It's going to affect my kids. And so I stand up in front of people and I say, listen, I'm going to be in a home probably, maybe wearing a diaper when all this is going down, okay? And my kids are going to be my age, or a little bit older. But in the process, you're going to be making changes to industry. You're going to be making policy and procedure, or policy and energy, in industry and in government. You're going to be the world leaders. Please take care of my kids, okay? I will teach and inform you. You go do, they get to live. Deal? Deal, okay? Resource depletion. Really quickly, we're using the world up, guys. There's currently 7 billion people on the planet, or just under 7 billion people on the planet. And anytime there's a scientist in here, I get kind of scared now when I spit out facts. Within your lifetime, or actually pretty soon, we're going to get 10 billion people. 100 years ago, there was a 1. Okay? So we know that population grows exponentially. New resources don't. Okay? So we're using more wood, more steel, more water. Table waters are falling. Glaciers are receding. Places in Asia are just water-strapped. We're losing topsoil because of our agricultural practices. Instead of returning nutrients to the soil, we use petrochemicals as our fertilizers and our herbicides. So we're going to end up in a situation pretty soon where there's not a whole lot left. And I want to read you something really quick from a person that I admire a lot, Lester Brown of the Earth Policy Institute. And this is about China and about this stuff that we have. For almost as long as I can remember, we've been saying that the United States, with 5% of the world's people, consumes a third or more of the Earth's resources. That was true. It is no longer true. Today, China consumes more basic resources than the United States does. Among the key commodities such as grain, meat, oil, coal, and steel, China consumes more of each than the United States, except for oil, where the United States still has a wide, though narrowing lead. China uses a third more grain than the United States. Its meat consumption is nearly double that of the United States, and it uses 3 times as much steel. These numbers reflect national consumption. But what would happen if consumption per person in China were to catch up to that of the United States? If we assume that China's economy slows from 10% annual growth of recent years to 8%, then in 2030, income per person in China will reach that of the level of the United States today. If we also assume that China will spend their income more or less as Americans do, then we can translate their income into consumption. If, for example, each person in China consumes paper at the current American rate, then in 2030, China's 1.46 billion people will need twice as much paper as produced worldwide today. There goes the world's forests. If we assume that in 2030 there are 3 cars for every 4 people in China, as there are in the United States today, China will have 1.1 billion cars. The world currently has 860 million cars. To provide the needed roads, highways, and parking lots, China would have to pave an area comparable to what it now plants in rice. No more rice. By 2030, China would need 98 million barrels of oil a day. The world is currently producing 85 million barrels a day, and may never produce more than that. There goes the world's oil reserves. What China is teaching us is that the American economic model, the fossil fuel-based, automobile-centered, throwaway economy is not going to work for China. If it doesn't work for China, it will not work for India, which by 2030 may have an even larger population than China. So in other words, in just 20 years, guys, China could use up everything that the world is using today. We just don't have that much to go around. Global climate weirding. I use the term global climate weirding because I don't like global warming, which I've already told you. And global climate change doesn't necessarily have the giggle factor that I'm looking for. So global climate weirding is just this. Things are going to get weird, okay? You're going to see more drought. You're going to see more flood. You're going to see, they're growing wine grapes in Britain. When I was at school in Wales, the idea that you could actually get a good wine in Great Britain was laughable. And now, they're able to do it. You're going to see bigger storms. You're going to see fires. It's just going to get weird, okay? And it's not because the entire Earth is getting warmer. It's because parts are getting warmer, parts are losing things, biodiversity is changing, ecosystems are shifting. We know this. This is not fantasy. This is science, okay? Couple of examples. Birds are starting to migrate farther north for their winter settling, okay? One for us is the ringtail gull, which you can see that used to reside in 1966 in southwest Mississippi. Now, they spend their winters, they winter in Kentucky. And there's a number of examples. You can see how it's just typically just shifting north. This is Mississippi. This should hit home. In 1986, the climate in Jackson was steady, okay? And so was the flora and the fauna. So the species were where they were supposed to be as the climate dictated. And we know that animals and plants can change. They can adapt to their environment. But they can only adapt so fast, right? So we start here. This is our start point. 10 years later, in 1996, we know that the climate that existed in 86 in Jackson now existed in Carthage. If you've ever traveled Highway 26, like going towards Starkville, you got that, right? At the same time, 10 years later, the flora and fauna had shifted. The ecosystem had basically moved as fast as it could, but there was still this big gap. So it had made it to about Clinton. 10 years later, now the climate that was in Jackson in 1986 is now in Belzoni. Flora and fauna moving as fast as they can. They just made it out of Jackson. So the gap becomes ever widening. And I don't mean that there's this migration. What I'm talking about is, the types of trees that can exist in these areas change over time, and then you see these die-offs, and the same thing with the animals.